Hello everyone, you have come to Tata Comic Preview channel. Let read together. Have fun. Yu Shangrong looked at the man's palms that caught his longevity sword. The man's palms were emitting purple gas. After he brought the longevity sword lower, he asked, "Are you a shaman?" The partially blind man retreated as he said, "How dare you compare the likes of me to those third-rate shamans?" Yu Shangrong's longevity sword thrummed and vibrated. After retreating 100 meters, the partially blind man raised his hand and unleashed a blast of energy. Yu Shangrong rode on the momentum and leaped upward before flipping. Then, he brought his sword down. Energy swords spun out and sliced through the purple gas. Bam! 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 The energy swords collided with the partially blind man's palms. The energy grew stronger as it did the outpour of primal chi. The black figure who was watching the battle from a distance widened his eyes before he retreated next to a huge tree with the partially blind man's cloak in hand. For some reason, his face was wet with sweat. He muttered to himself, "Who are these people?" Meanwhile, the partially blind man's attacks intensified in rhythm. The rhythm of the partially blind man's attacks was being intensified. He kept releasing clouds of purple gas and somehow managed to avoid the longevity sword. Yu Shangrong unleashed his sword strikes at top speed, it seemed almost instinctual. Energy swords and energy fists filled the skies. They seemed to be evenly matched. The two opponents moved toward another peak, leaving fallen trees in their wake. An hour later. The moon hung high in the sky and shone on the land. It was so bright that it seemed almost as bright as day. The partially blind man's energy fists were growing in intensity while Yu Shangrong's sword slashes were picking up speed as well. All the black figure could see were two shadows clashing over and over again in the air and the numerous energy seals. Boom! A deafening explosion thundered in the air as a vertical blast of energy appeared in the sky. The power balance had finally tilted. Both opponents retreated at the same time and stared at each other from a distance. The partially blind man looked at Yu Shangrong, whose expression remained calm since the beginning. His eyes gleamed with excitement as he said, "Good." After that, the partially blind man removed his clothes and bandana. A monk? Yu Shangrong finally saw his opponent's appearance. His opponent looked like a monk. "I never kill someone without asking for their names. What's yours?" The partially blind man pointed at Yu Shangrong. Yu Shangrong smiled faintly and said, "My apologies. You don't have the right to know my name yet." As he spoke, he shot toward the partially blind man like a meteorite. Energy swords that looked solid appeared at a greater speed. Upon seeing this, the partially blind man glowered before he parried with his purplish-black fists. Bam! The partially blind man's fist collided with the longevity sword. Yu Shangrong let go of his longevity sword and joined his palms together. Thousands upon thousands of energy swords appeared around his longevity sword before they shot toward the partially blind man. Primal restoration. The man's body shone with greater radiance, a stronger energy shield appeared around him immediately. Bam! 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 The energy shield managed to keep the energy swords at bay. Boom! A wave of energy surged out violently. Both opponents retreated. Yu Shangrong raised an eyebrow as he said, "Not bad. I didn't expect you to be able to withstand that attack." In close range, the primal restoration's power was intense. It was akin to being stabbed by thousands upon thousands of energy sword point blank. Yu Shangrong did not expect the partially blind man to unleash a blast of energy capable of repelling the energy swords. The partially blind man heaved a long sigh before he said solemnly, "Forget it. We both have limited time. Take this final move of mine as a parting gift for you while you head to the Yellow Springs." Yu Shangrong immediately sensed the change in the partially blind man's aura. The partially blind man's bones seemed pliable at this moment, and his skin began to wrinkle like tree bark. His arms looked as though they had been dyed purple and shone with a faint light. Yu Shangrong loosened his grip on the sword briefly before he tightened it again. The longevity sword buzzed as energy shrouded it. At this moment, the partially blind man shot up above Yu Shangrong. He was clearly much more agile than before. Then, he raised his fist. In just a moment, a strong gale appeared in the area within 100 meters. Primal chi surged and gathered around them. Yu Shangrong frowned slightly upon seeing this peculiar scene, his instincts warned him of danger. He said in a somewhat admiring tone, "Interesting." The primal chi gathered and surged toward the partially blind man like a tornado. He was now at the eye of the tornado. It did not escape Yu Shangrong's notice that the partially blind man seemed to be holding something in his hand at this moment. It was not an offensive weapon, based on what he could see. In his opinion, the item in the man's hand must be what was gathering the primal chi. It was likely a desolate-grade treasure. Yu Shangrong's robes fluttered in the air as he continued watching. His longevity sword, the weapon that had accompanied him almost his entire life, was only a heaven-grade weapon. The strong wind lifted his robes. A satisfied and smug expression appeared on the partially blind man's face as he looked at his masterpiece. "I've accumulated primal chi close to that of a 10-leaf elite's attack in this fist. This will kill you." Yu Shangrong raised his sword. The primal chi in his sea of chi converged in his longevity sword. The power that had been stored beforehand resonated as well. What was the Son of Heaven's sword? It started with yin and yang, it was maintained all through spring and summer, it moved during autumn and winter, it was used by feudal lords to govern the lands. Primal chi coursed through Yu Shangrong's extraordinary 8 meridians. At the same time, the primal chi around Yu Shangrong seemed to gravitate toward the partially blind man's desolate-grade weapon. Upon sensing the surging power, the partially blind man's confidence grew greatly. Whiz. The partially blind man manifested his avatar. It was a 9-leaf red lotus avatar. A tint of purple could be seen on his red lotus. This reminded Yu Shangrong of his experience when he severed his lotus. The difference was the partially blind man's red lotus was shrouded in purple mist that complemented it. Boosted by the 150-foot avatar, the partially blind man leaped before he dove. He fisted his hand and swung them out. A sharp cone-shaped energy seal formed around his fist as he swung it toward Yu Shangrong's face. He said icily, "Die." At this moment, Yu Shangrong raised his sword. An unyielding expression could be seen on his face. The sword devil never retreats. Yu Shangrong stepped forward before vanishing out of sight. Soon after, 3 of his figures appeared, looking more mysterious under the moonlight. This was one of the most powerful techniques from the Guiyuan sword technique, return, enter 3 souls. Yu Shangrong manifested his avatar at this moment. A 9-leaf avatar appeared. The partially blind man continued to advance, confident his punch would land on his target. At the moment the 3 figures merged into one, the man's energy exploded. His entire right arm glowed red, and his fist was such a dark color that it seemed black. When Yu Shangrong thrust his sword forward. Bam! The sword's tip and the fist collided. A huge blast of energy rippled out into the surroundings immediately. Boom! The impact from the shockwave created a long and narrow pit on the ground. The rocks and trees that stood in the way were immediately destroyed. The pit on the ground continued to extend until it reached the nearby mountain range. With this, the mountain quaked, causing rocks to roll down. The frown on the partially blind man's face deepened. He stared at the point of collision between his fist and the longevity sword. The 2 opposing forces seemed to be stuck in a stalemate. A contemptuous expression appeared on the partially blind man's face as purplish-black energy seals shot out from his fist. Yu Shangrong looked at the energy seals. Desolate grade? The longevity sword vibrated. Bam! Faced with a desolate grade weapon that was backed with ample power, an ominous breaking sound rang from the longevity sword. It was a sound that Yu Shangrong dreaded to hear. The longevity sword that fought by his side for so many years was broken. Over the centuries, Yu Shangrong had never been troubled and always maintained his composure. His heart had always been as calm as still water no matter the situation. However, at this moment, a frown could be seen on his face as rage bubbled up in his heart. After breaking the longevity sword broke, the partially blind man's fist advanced. Bam! The punch struck Yu Shangrong's protective energy. The boost from his avatar was apparent at this moment as the force from the punch dissipated after landing on his energy shield. I admire your sword techniques, but, alas, nobody has ever survived this punch of mine. Goodbye. The partially blind man pulled his fist back before he swung his fist out again. His fist punched through Yu Shangrong's energy and arrived at Yu Shangrong's chest. Yu Shangrong let go of his broken longevity sword. He joined his index and middle finger before primal chi surged out. Then, he brought his hand up to meet the punch. The partially blind man sneered. I might have been slightly wary of your broken sword. Now that you've thrown it away, you've completely lost whatever small chance you have of winning. At this moment, a faint hint of fury could be seen on Yu Shangrong's otherwise calm expression. My apologies. Even without my longevity sword, you'll still die. Yu Shangrong's golden avatar levitated. The partially blind frowned in confusion. When Yu Shangrong unleashed his energy previously, he knew Yu Shangrong was a golden lotus cultivator. However, what appeared before him now was incredibly strange. He discovered his opponent's avatar had no lotus. There's no golden lotus? He quickly looked up at Yu Shangrong's expression. Yu Shangrong smiled faintly. 9 golden leaves shot out of Yu Shangrong's avatar. Yu Shangrong controlled them with his fingers and formed a long golden dragon that shot toward his opponent. 3 golden leaves sliced the partially blind man's protective energy open while the remaining 6 leaves pierced his chest. The sound of skin being pierced rang in the air 6 times in a row. The force behind the leaves was so strong that they continued to fly after piercing the partially blind man's chest before they finally stopped after stabbing into the ground. Just like this, the battle ended. From the partially blind man's back, a gaping hole could be seen where his heart should have been. The primal chi in the air was quickly dissipating. Fresh blood flowed out of the partially blind man's chest onto the grass. The purplish-black gas dissipated as well. The man's arms regained their original colors. The partially blind's eyes were brimming with incredulity. Perhaps, this was one of the benefits of severing one's lotus. Yu Shangrong could catch his opponent off guard. The people of the Red Lotus domain were unaware of this technique, after all. Naturally, as an outstanding swordsman, Yu Shangrong would not risk his life and use this technique all the time. Instead, he would use it to guide the flow of the battle. He was truly an outstanding sword path elite. Now that the partially blind's heart had been pierced, his death was certain. At this moment, the Red Lotus avatar finally disappeared. The partially blind muttered, "You can do that?" Then, he plummeted to the ground with a loud boom. Yu Shangrong withdrew his avatar and searched for Jiang Shaosheng. At the spot where Jiang Shaosheng was previously standing, only a black cloak could be seen on the ground. He was nowhere to be found. Yu Shangrong looked down for a moment before he finally descended. As soon as his feet touched the ground, he grunted and spat out a mouthful of blood. He quickly lifted a hand and pressed it against his chest as he sat down cross-legged to adjust his breathing. The stars in the sky twinkled as it suddenly began to drizzle. Yu Shangrong did not like how unpredictable the weather was in the Red Lotus domain. Nevertheless, for an elite like him, it was easy to keep the rain at bay. Before the rain could even land on his body, they were evaporated by a surge of energy. The area within 2 meters of him was completely dry. After what seemed like hours, the rain finally stopped. Yu Shangrong opened his eyes, his injuries were less severe now. He sighed, displeased with his performance. This was his first time getting injured in a battle. He murmured to himself, "Yu Shangrong, when are you going to become like your master?" Yu Shangrong collected his thoughts and looked at his broken longevity sword with a frown on his face. He felt a weight on his chest when he looked at his sword. When he first joined the Evil Sky Pavilion, he had trained and honed his sword skills with a wooden sword. After his master gave him the longevity sword, it had become an integral part of his life. He was not fanatic to the point where he loved swords to the bones like Zhenghai, but he valued it as much as he valued his life. Was the sword devil destined to be alone? The sword had accompanied him through his toughest times. It had helped him slay countless enemies, and it helped prolong his short life as a nobleman. It did not matter that the sword was not alive. So long as he had the sword, he could live. Now that the sword was destroyed, would he die? Yuan'er was visibly shaking at this moment. He did not use his primal chi as he slowly walked over to his sword while he endured his injuries. He picked his comrade up from the ground with his bare hands, forgoing the use of energy. The longevity sword that reigned supreme in the Golden Lotus realm was destroyed. Yuan'er carefully placed both fragments of the longevity sword back into the scabbard. This way, the longevity sword would be complete. He inhaled deeply before he raised his hand and drew the treasure in the partially blind man's hands toward himself. What should have been easy caused him much pain. He coughed twice. He shook his head lightly as he looked at the sky. You're truly a good-for-nothing. This was the first time the confident Yuan'er called himself the good-for-nothing. Yuan'er straightened his back and held his longevity sword in one hand as he traveled by foot back to Cloud Mountain. Meanwhile, Zhou returned from the palace. Witzard's speed had always been consistent. He found it satisfactory as well. When he saw the 12 peaks of Cloud Mountain, a familiar noise rang from the horizon. Nay. Stop. Zhou commanded Witzard to stop as he looked in the direction of the noise. Soon enough, Zhenghai appeared before his eyes, trotting toward him under the moon's light. Zhou stroked his beard and called out, Zhenghai. Zhenghai had a white coat and red mane. Its eyes were golden, and they had a faint glow. Initially, it was moving at a rather leisurely pace, but when it saw its master, it began to gallop toward its master. You're not slower than Witzard, but why are you late? Zhou asked, puzzled. Nay. That one nay clearly conveyed Zhenghai's emotion. It seemed exhausted from its long journey. Zhou grew even more puzzled. Witzard did not seem as exhausted as Zhenghai when it first arrived. Turn around, Zhou ordered. Zhenghai obeyed the order and turned around. Zhou saw scabs on its hind hooves. He frowned. Upon closer inspection, he saw wounds on its body as well. The wounds looked like they came from a whip. Zhou leaped off Witzard's back immediately and studied Zhenghai carefully. He saw there were marks of Zhenghai being chained around its neck. With all these marks and wounds, Zhou, naturally, had an idea of what had happened. No wonder Zhenghai took so long to arrive, it was being held captive by someone. With Zhenghai's abilities, ordinary cultivators would not have been able to do anything to it. Zhou was rather certain its captors must have seized the opportunity when Zhenghai was exhausted after crossing the endless ocean to capture it. They dare lay their hands on my mount? Zhou said with a hint of fury. Nay. Nay. Zhenghai moved its head up and down as though it was nodding and responding to Zhou's words. Can you recognize those who hurt you? Nay. Nay. All right. I'll give you justice once you're healed. Zhou patted Zhenghai's back. Then, he raised his hand. A blue lotus dropped down on Zhenghai. Zhenghai was initially exhausted, but it seemed to grow more energetic as the blue lotus healed it. Just when Zhou was about to return to Cloud Mountain with his 2 mounts. Nay. Zhenghai neighed loudly and raised its 2 front hooves before it galloped toward the distance without any warning. Zhenghai. Zhou called out sternly. However, for some reason, Zhenghai did not even look back as it disappeared into the night. Zhou was baffled. As Zhenghai's master, he was slightly perplexed by its lack of regard for him. He had never felt perplexed even when he faced a 10-leaf expert. He waited for a while. However, Zhenghai did not turn around or return. You traitor. If I see you again, I'll kill you with a single strike. Zhou waved his arm and looked at Witzard. Are you going to leave as well? Witzard?